The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL. You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast.
All right, so I know you guys are going to hate me for bringing this up again. I keep talking and banging the drum for Shedeur Sanders, and I do think the Browns still do like Shedeur Sanders. I do believe that they would like to take him, just not at number 2 overall. And so understanding that, I think they would at least consider a trade up for him if he falls to a certain point, is the way I'm kind of approaching this draft. Now, I am backing off the stance that they're going to be aggressive and go do it because of, well, several factors. One being the cost to get back up. If you're trying to get to like even 20, you're going to have to overpay massively. I'm talking like probably at least one of your thirds this year, a couple other picks this year, probably a first or a second next year. Like it's going to be a haul to get from even 33 to like 20 if you have to jump the Steelers per se to get Shedeur Sanders if you're worried about the Steelers being the team that takes him. So I don't think it's going to happen because I just think the price is going to be too rich for Andrew Berry. But there is an NFL insider who is not ruling it out. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN said in a segment on SportsCenter late last week that Cleveland does, quote, love Shedeur Sanders. They have love for Shedeur Sanders. And he actually mentions, as I just said, the Steelers as an option to potentially draft Shedeur Sanders if he falls. The exact quote is, if he falls out of the top 3, well, not falls, but if he doesn't go in the top 3 right now, I don't see a natural home. Seems like the Saints could go quarterback, but they might not do it at 9. They could go cornerback or offensive line, defensive line. So where does that leave it? If I had to predict, I would say somebody trades up to get him if he kind of slides into the teens or maybe the later first round. So I've ruled out the teens. If you're trading up to the teens to get Shedeur Sanders, you should have just taken him 2. Like you must have thought he was at least good enough to be worth it at that pick. Now what you have to pay, you have to overpay in terms of draft capital to get back up to get him in the teens, not worth it to me. So I don't think it's going to happen if he slides to the teens. For the Browns to trade up, I do think it would take him getting past the Steelers and probably into like the mid-20s. Like if you're talking like pick 24, 25, somewhere in that range, that's where I could see it. That's sort of striking distance where you still have to give up a decent amount to get up there. Maybe like even a future second and some other picks. But it's at least in range where it makes sense for them to be like, okay, we like this guy. Let's go get him and be a little bit aggressive here without, mortgaging the entire future, because we all know the situation this team is in. They didn't have first round picks the last 3 years because of the Deshaun Watson trade. They're trying to replenish and make amends and make up for the picks that they were lacking the last several years by, filling out this roster and utilize as many of these picks as possible to address needs in certain areas that they have to fill. So you don't want to give up a ton, especially this year where you have 4 top 100 picks to get, just go get this quarterback who, like I said, does have, I think, a ceiling to his game. But, I've said it a million times. He is a fit for Kevin Stefanski's offense. I think he's probably one of the best fits for Kevin Stefanski's offense. He is the best fit for Kevin Stefanski's offense in this draft. I will say that without any reservations. And I understand where some of the concerns come from, the not so strong arm, the lack of some athleticism, but he has the confidence you need. Again, he has the accuracy, he has the decision making, he can do all the things that you would need to do in a Kevin Stefanski system. And for that reason, I still like him for the Browns. Given Andrew Berry's comments, I've backed off the idea that they're going to be aggressive and trade back up. I think they're probably going to actually end up settling for somebody like Dart, Milroe, maybe Tyler Shuck even later, and let that be what it is. See what that guy can bring to the table, and if they're right back drafting a quarterback next year, so be it. But again, in a scenario where he fell, I think Jeremy Fowler's right. Like there's the Browns would be willing to trade up, I believe, if Shedeur ends up in a certain range of picks. That's the way I'll put it. Like he has to fall to a certain point for them to even think it's worth it. The Giants might act a little more desperately. He mentioned some team's going to probably trade up to get him if he slips through the teens. That Giants are the team that I think probably maybe acts a little bit more rash and says, listen, given how the Saquon Barkley situation went, we need a young quarterback here. Let's go get him. And maybe they would jump the Browns to go do something like that. I think the Browns are operating from a place of like patience and just trying to sort of find the best players at the respective picks that they have. And if they can maximize those by getting a player that they value in maybe a Shedeur Sanders by trading up somewhat, I think they'll do it. But there has to be, there's a striking distance range that I think the Browns would consider it. Otherwise, give what Andrew Berry said about fifth-year options. And they're the most valuable, by the way, for quarterback picks. I just don't think it's ultimately going to happen. But as I showed you there from the Jeremy Fowler comments, not ruling it out entirely. And Andrew Berry probably wouldn't rule it out entirely either because, as he always says, they are open to anything when it comes to the NFL draft. We'll see if that's true in this instance, but that is where things stand. And at least some people with information, by the way, are reporting that it still could happen. So just putting it out there, just mentioning it one last time this week because you know how much I love Shedeur Sanders and think he fit this team. I get that a lot of you are against me. That's totally fine. You are welcome to have the opinions that you have. But I wanted to put that out there one more time before we get to draft day on Thursday.
Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. Play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. Already have a console? A Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take you or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube, 3rd Gen.
Rumors suggest the Denver Broncos may be looking to trade up into the first round a little bit higher than the 20th overall pick.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast.
The NFL draft, the week of the rumors escalate. We heard from Broncos general manager George Paton and head coach Sean Payton last week. And one thing that George said in terms about the inner workings of trade calls last week when he met with us in a press conference, he said, you know, the week before the draft, you have calls, but really it gets aggressive the week of the draft. And rumors suggest here, according to Adam Schefter, that the Broncos have made calls. They've been one of the teams that have been interested in making calls about moving up in this year's draft. Is it smokescreen? Is it real?
That's what I'm wondering. Just like everybody else, right? Because there's the, you know, the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder, right? This time of year that's saying, hey, trade up. You need to trade up. You need to go get your guy. And then there's the angel on the other side that's like, no, stay put, trade back, get more picks, you know, load up the war chest, all these sorts of things. What's fascinating to me is that simultaneously trading up for the Denver Broncos in this particular draft would make a ton of sense and would make no sense at all. It would make a ton of sense because, look, you could go get maybe the best playmaker in this class offensively with Ashton Genty, right? If you can move up high enough to get Genty, he could be the missing piece to your roster. So in that sense, I mean, trading up does kind of make a little bit of sense, right? But then, you know, on the other side of the coin, it's like, well, this draft is deep at the positions that you need the most: running back, tight end, defensive line, wide receiver, all these different positions. They could help your team tremendously get over the top in the AFC. So, Cody, to me, I don't know how to read into this. I don't know exactly what to. I know that one thing we do know is that George Paton said last week at the pre-draft presser, right? He talked about how they've already made preliminary calls to just about every team in the NFL. So they've talked to everybody. It's not news that the Broncos have called teams about trading up, because George Paton told us last week that he's already talked to everybody and they have scenarios. But what's interesting about the timing of the rumor is that it comes this week, which is the week that George said, hey, this is when things start to get serious.
Yeah, and part of me is wondering, Adam Schefter, obviously, when he said that, part of me is wondering if he was just referencing what George said in the pre-draft presser about, we've had calls initially here next week, when the draft does come, that's when talks get stronger. I do wonder if that's probably what he piggybacked off of, because even last week, Adam Schefter on NFL Live went out there. This was after the pre-draft press conference, and he talked about guys like Travion Henderson. He talked about guys like Colston Loveland, Omari and Hampton a little bit. Sean's looking for that next Joker. Like, that was the conversation. So it wasn't like Adam Schefter was saying anything that we didn't necessarily know, but I did find it interesting. Like, okay, how valid is this? I think the names you want to keep an eye on when it comes to maybe the pulse on the Broncos from a national scale, I would say Tom Pelissero. We've noted that relationship that he and George Payton certainly have there. I think Jordan Schultz has it in somewhere. I'm very curious to figure out where that is, but Jordan Schultz seems to have a little bit of a finger on the pulse of the Broncos as well. To me, ultimately, Sarah, I think we got to look at it from a multitude of ways. I think you make some great points. Like in this year's draft, like the Broncos aren't in a position where it's like they have to be desperate. Like you need to trade up and get a guy just to get the guy. They said it, and this is where we got to invest. Do we take value in what they're saying, where they believe at 20th overall they can pick a player of the same quality who's going to be available with the 10th overall pick? Or is that them trying to say, hey, maybe we want to get to the 10th overall pick and then be able to pick a player there? If they do, let's say hypothetically trade up here, Sarah, who do you think they go after? I know you mentioned Ashton Genty, but obviously the Las Vegas Raiders at 6th overall are the team that everyone is pegging them to pick Ashton Genty. I can't see Denver going from the 20th overall pick to pick number 5 and leapfrog in there. That makes things very interesting, though. If the Giants are interested in trading back, which has been a reported rumor, that would be interesting. But why would they want to drop all the way back when they can get a player like Travis Hunter at 3rd overall or an Abdul Carter as a pass rusher? So to me, like the Giants don't necessarily make a lot of sense for Denver to just say, hey, we're going to go from 20. We want to get all the way up to 3rd overall here at this point. I don't see that happening.
I don't either. I think that there's also been some steam gaining towards the Jaguars at 5 being interested in drafting Ashton Genty, and perhaps that would kind of take all these scenarios off the table, because I don't know that I would see anybody outside of, Genty, Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland. Those guys are all generally considered top 10 players in this particular class. Maybe Mason Graham, Cody. I'm actually putting together a scenario right now where he falls to 11th overall to the 49ers, because if the Jaguars don't take him at 5 and the Raiders don't take him at 6, what could happen there? So I don't think he's necessarily a blue chip guy worth trading up for, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's got the 32-inch arms, the question marks there. So not that that's the biggest deal in the world, but it might be the difference between trading a future 1st or 2nd round pick to go up and get a guy. So that to me is where I start to wonder, okay, who is that right guy that you'd be willing to trade multiple picks for? Because we know Javonte Williams has led this team in touches the last 2 seasons. That running back position is going to get a lot of work. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to find the guy in round 1, because Sean Payton has found him just about everywhere. George Payton has found him just about everywhere. And Sean even commended George for drafting a guy who had a 1st round caliber in Dalvin Cook a handful of years ago when he was with the Vikings. He called him out by name during their press conference as well. And so I think the Broncos really do believe they can get that guy on day 2. So now it's just going to be about, all right, let's put our money where our mouth is then. Let's see if you really believe that, or if you truly believe that Genty is head and shoulders above every other running back that you could have in this draft, that you say, we have to get him at any cost, at every cost, whatever it costs, we have to go up and get him. That's got to be the mentality of them saying, we believe we can contend in the AFC if we get player X. It has to be Genty, in my opinion.
Well, and they believe that their offensive line is fully intact, at least at 4 of the 5 positions there. They love their offensive line. We know it's one of the highest graded units by the team itself in that category. So they believe they have the offensive line to get it done. And now it's just about finding, I think, that right running back to be the fit. If Denver were to somehow try to trade into the top 10, Sarah, I imagine they'd have to obviously swap with the 20th overall pick. But part of me thinks they'd have to also give up a 1st rounder next year, which I don't know. Is that something the Broncos are willing to take a gamble on? It's an interesting question.
Do the Denver Broncos want to have a small targeted draft class in 2025, or do they want to take advantage of the depth of this class? Well, we have a case for both here, Broncos country, but trading down, it's probably the way to go for the Denver Broncos. We're going to tell you why on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And thanks once again to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. If you haven't already become an everyday listener, hit subscribe wherever you listen, as well as on YouTube. Let's talk about pros and cons of trading up or down in the NFL draft. And we'll start off with Cody. I think the pros and cons of trading down, because we kind of discussed in segment one, like, hey, trading up, you're going after a guy, you're giving up future capital, potentially even a future first round pick to get him. And we talk about how deep this draft is at positions of need for the Denver Broncos. And so, of course, the one real con of trading down in this kind of a draft is that, well, we got to sit there all night Thursday night only for the Broncos to potentially not make a selection. But the pros vastly seem to outweigh the cons when it comes to trading down.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, trading down allows you to acquire more draft capital, which can be in return used to trade back up. Like there's so many moving pieces, right? So let's say Denver were to trade out of the 20th spot, and let's say they traded back, 5 spots. Okay, well, they swapped there, but maybe they acquire a back end round 2 pick. Maybe they acquire an additional round 3 pick at that point. And then it's like, all right, we know here at 25, we can get a player that we have highly graded on our board based on how things are going. We believe we're going to get a quality player at 25, but we also have back-end capital now in round number 2. We get an additional second, or we get an additional third. That allows us to make quality depth additions here to your roster. So it is kind of like just playing like the numbers game a little bit. Well, I think a lot of people look at it like, well, if you're picking 25th or if you're picking 28th, it's like if you have the luxury of being a Super Bowl team and you're picking 32nd overall, you're like, well, you're not going to get a great player at 32nd overall, but you're going to get a good one. You have to weigh the balance of that. And so what is more valuable here to the Broncos in terms of where they're at? Now, think of it this way. TreVeyon Henderson. Let's say Denver traded back 5 spots to 25th overall. TreVeyon Henderson could still be there, right? Or it gives you additional capital in the second. Say, okay, we're going to swap with another team to move up to the early portion of round number 2 to get Henderson, so he's not taken before, the Broncos have a chance to get him. I think trading back gives you more flexibility, though I will say Sean Payton is not the type to really trade back throughout his career. He's more so of a trade-up guy. George likes to trade back and acquire more capital. This is their 3rd year together, and we've seen a little bit of balance. We've seen some give and take here. I think really the first year that we had George and Sean together, obviously the 2023 NFL draft, you saw them trade up into round number 2 to get Marvin Mims. And then you saw them obviously select Drew Sanders with their round 3 pick, trade back into round 3 to get a Riley Moss. So we've seen them be aggressive. We've seen them acquire more picks as well by trading back or swapping with the team, but it hasn't necessarily been the first round value. That's where this is all new. This is the second time in a row, really outside of last year. Look, you had Bo Nix. That was a huge need. But now you enter a year where the Broncos don't necessarily have to go out there and say, hey, we must go get this guy or bust. They're not in that position this year, whereas the running back position they've detailed. They have a lot of really good runners in this draft that they like. D-line, there's a lot of really good depth. So for me, just hearing what George and Sean said about how they view running back and D-line, I don't see them necessarily trading up, to be honest with you. I know we talked about that in the first segment. I don't see them trading up. I see them staying put or trading back because, hey, you trade back, acquire more capital. Let's say you get your running back in round 1 or you get a D tackle in round 1. Well, now you can go out there and get a running back in round 2, and then you can just load up with other assets there to build overall depth, because this draft is really outside of maybe running back. You're not drafting a starter here in round 1.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating is, like we've talked about, Sean Payton has said, or George Payton has said, that you might not get a very different player at number 20 that you could get at 10 in this year's draft. And there's not a lot of differentiation in the grades on these guys, at least from what they're saying publicly. And so maybe you feel like if you move out of round 1, let's say a team like the Giants or the Cleveland Browns is really desperate for a quarterback that's there at 20 overall, and they say, hey, here's pick number 33 and pick number 60, whatever it is, and then you can add a number of picks in the top 100. I feel like you're upgrading from potentially getting 3 starters in this draft to getting 4 to 5 potential starters out of just the day 2 picks in this draft. And that might not be something that this team wants to scoff at after missing out on the first 2 rounds almost entirely of the 2022 and 2023 drafts if they hadn't snuck in with Nick Bonito and Marvin Mims, obviously. But this team doesn't have a ton of recent top 50 picks on the roster, which is big in terms of roster building and development and really having a contender for the long haul. That's the big deal with Denver right now, is this team is not rebuilding. This team is not reloading. This team is not resetting. This team is building upon. This team they've moved into the house, right? They're trying to find, hey, what size of TV do we want in the living room? What kind of couch do we want to get? What kind of fridge do we, like, we've got the house, we've got the foundation, we've got the key components. Now we need to start thinking big, dreaming big. Do we want to get a wood kitchen table? What kind of wood do we want to get? What kind of color do we want it to be? They're moving in. They've got all the big stuff. They now need to get the furnishings. They need to feel like, hey, now this house, it's become our home. That's what this draft has to be for the Denver Broncos, and they don't need to trade up in order to make that happen.
I relate to what you say so much right now in my own life because, my fiance and I were getting ready for our wedding, and there's things like we go through like needs and wants. And it's like, oh, I want this. Like, you fill out your registry and it's like, what do we need? Like, what is it that we're going to need? She goes, need this, but I want this. For example, we got a really nice coffee pot. I didn't need it. I wanted it. Whereas she wanted the immersion blender, said, oh, that's actually something that we need. We need a KitchenAid. So for the Broncos, I think, Sarah, you nailed it perfectly. The foundation is there. The overall roster, like your starters on offense and defense, almost every position is accounted for in terms of your starters, who's going to play high impact minutes, who's going to be your key rotational guys. It's about adding quality players and depth that are going to help you not just this year, but maybe 2 years, 3 years down the road. But you want to have high quality players that fit the mold of your team DNA. And I think that's exactly what Sean Payton and George Payton are going to do in this year's draft. Look, there's no simple answer to it by saying, hey, like Denver's going to go aggressively get this one guy and it's going to change their landscape, right? The odds of one player doing that, it's very low, but there's always a possibility, right? All it takes is the right player going to the right situation, which Denver, I think for some players is an ideal fit for a lot of these draft prospects that are coming in here that obviously going to have their names called on night number 1 here. But I really think the meat and bones of this is going to be in rounds 2, 3, 4, and then obviously they have multiple picks in round number 6 here. Will they acquire somehow a 5th round pick? Will they make a draft day trade? Like, this roster is in a position where it could be tweaked a little bit, but you don't have to make widespread changes. Denver's got the foundational pieces, the bricks that are going to keep the foundation sturdy. They've got those in place. And with the quarterback like Bo Nix, now it's about, can we make him better? Can we, not necessarily just him. Obviously, there's an evolution of his own performance where he has to be as a player at that position. But it's, can we get the pieces around Bo Nix that are going to allow him to thrive? Can we get the defensive players, the right defensive guys that are going to get him more opportunities to possess the football, to get off the field? That's one thing the Broncos want to do a little bit more of this season. And it's multifaceted. It's not just, hey, let's get Bo Nix as many weapons as possible, because guess what? You only have 11 guys on the field at one time. So as much as cool as that would be to be able to get, all these guys, build it the right way. And I think that Sean and George, they're aligned on what that right way is. And I think Thursday, we're going to find out exactly. We're going to get clarity, cemented, concrete evidence about what that may be.
The NFL Draft will give the Chicago Bears a chance to answer some of the biggest questions on their roster.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast.
After we saw free agency, where Ben Johnson got a couple of his guys and Dennis Allen got a couple of his guys, how well that continues into the NFL Draft, or if this is a realm where Ryan Poles will have a little bit more say, a little bit more swinging power to kind of say, no, we're going to draft the guys that we see as the best players, sort of, not regardless of, but without complete power over, like, is this an ideal Ben Johnson player? Is this an ideal Dennis Allen player? Or is this just the best player available, so take this talented player and make it work? Right? When we think about how they went through free agency with the trades and the signings that they made, they went and got a guard that Ben Johnson used to work with in Detroit, in Jonah Jackson. They went and got another top guard in the trade market in Joe Thuney, who Ryan Poles had familiar with. They got the top center in Drew Dahlman. Like, clearly, Ben Johnson came in and said, I want to overhaul, fix, and prioritize the interior of this offensive line. And Ryan Poles got those guys for Ben Johnson. They didn't spend a lot at wide receiver. They didn't go out and add at running back. They didn't add an offensive tackle. They didn't get much at tight end. They got what Ben Johnson wanted on his offensive line. And same thing on the defensive line, right? They go out and get a big-bodied, long defensive end in Dayo Odeyingbo that fits the mold of the type of player Dennis Allen has typically preferred and coveted at the defensive end position. And then they add a really solid, strong, consistent veteran leader on the interior in Grady Jarrett that Dennis Allen coached against a lot and really wanted to have as a part of this interior defensive line. Like, these were two guys that fit exactly what Dennis Allen would like. There was a clear, strong influence on getting these coaches their guys that they were really fired up about in free agency to say, hey, we need these veterans that are going to be key pieces of what we want to be able to accomplish as these new Bears coaches. But the NFL draft might be a little different, or could be a little bit different. And how much different or not, I think will tell us a lot about how much influence Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen have on the Bears draft board. Because obviously, Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen can't influence who's going to be there when the Bears are picking at 10. And maybe, there's going to be situations where, Ben Johnson's guy or Dennis Allen's guy is the top option available anyway, so you take them. And there's going to be times when maybe Ben Johnson's guy or Dennis Allen's guy, their type of player isn't necessarily the best player available on the board. And that's where you start to narrow this down, where it's like, if you're Ryan Poles, are you drafting players specifically because that they're the ideal, scheme fit for what your coaching staff prefers? Or are you going to take the best, most talented player available and have your coaching staff make it work because you're going to say, hey, this is a really good player, even though maybe it doesn't do exactly the kind of things we do. You need to find a way to make it work with this player because he's very, very good. So you put him in the best position to be successful, even if it's not quote unquote ideal for your scheme, right? So we think about this in terms of the defensive ends in this draft class, especially in the first round. There are bigger, longer defensive ends that kind of fit more what Dennis Allen has preferred. Somebody like Mykel Williams from Georgia or Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. But Ryan Poles and the scouting staff could look at somebody like Mike Green from Marshall or James Pierce from Tennessee and see more production, more well-rounded skill set, more refined skill set, more advanced as a pass rusher. But those guys aren't as big and long and, oversized on the edge. And so it's a question of, do you go get the guy who's Dennis Allen's preferred style of scheme fit? Or if you're the scouting staff, you say, we really think Mike Green or James Pierce, whoever is going to be the better player, then who gets the final say there? Like, what's the priority there? And it's not just the defensive end positions, but I think about at cornerback. We know Dennis Allen is a coach who's going to run more man coverage than what the Bears have run in the past. It's not extreme man coverage, but Dennis Allen might prefer a corner that has some more man coverage skills that they can trust in one-on-one situations. And because you can kind of buffer the zone with safety help over the top, but when it's man-to-man coverage, you need that man-to-man guy. But if there's a really good corner that maybe isn't as special in man-to-man, but just has elite zone instincts and ball skills, like what becomes the priority there? Maybe the all-around better player, or a player that's more of a specific scheme fit to what Dennis Allen might like? Same thing on offense. I think about with the running backs, right? Do you get Dennis? We know Ben Johnson is going to run a lot of outside zone and more zone concepts. So then are you only drafting the zone running backs like Caleb Johnson? Or if you look at guys that ran more gap scheme stuff in college, like if you think they're a better, more talented running back, how much does scheme fit and coach preference play in there? I think you can make a similar case on the offensive line for the same reasons, right? Offensive lineman who can get out in space and zone, or is there a better all-around prospect that is fine in zone, right? It's about specialties here. You're not going to draft a player that just straight up can't do what your coach is going to ask them to do, right? There is a line there somewhere, but we're talking about talent versus ideal fit. And you might just say, well, hey, this player didn't run a lot of outside zone in college, but we think he's super, super talented and can do it at this next level. So let's get the more talented player, even if he hasn't always been the ideal scheme fit, and we'll make him a scheme fit by, in some ways, molding the scheme a little bit around him, or finding a role within the scheme on either side of the ball that can utilize that player to the best of his abilities, even if it's not neatly in the box that Ben Johnson might prefer on offense or Dennis Allen might prefer on defense. So I'm really curious to see how they manage those preferences of overall talent versus potential scheme fit, and what that tells us about how much influence these Bears coaches are having on the draft board, getting guys for the coaches versus just getting really good football players and telling the coaching staff, hey, this is a really good player. You find a way to make it work, because if you can't make him work, then you're the problem, not him, because this is a really good, talented football player that we have to get in this draft because we believe in him. In the converse there, I also think what positions the Bears decide to invest in will tell us a lot about how they feel about what they have on the roster and what they don't have on the roster. In particular, I'm curious how much of a priority ultimately does get put on weapons like running backs, tight ends, and even wide receivers, or if they go through the draft and don't address it much, then they've got a lot of confidence in what the Bears have here.